Hi, everyone, and welcome to Breaking the News, Deep Cut Conversations, our interview series previewing the forthcoming documentary podcast, Breaking the News, CNN and the Birth of Chaos Media. I'm John Hashimoto, joined by my co-host and series co-producer Bill Smee. Today, we're talking with Meredith Artley and Mitra Kalita, two journalists and media executives who helped lead CNN Digital through one of the most consequential transitions in modern news. The shift from desktop to mobile, from homepage to social feed, from CNN as the place people went for breaking news, to a world where news was suddenly everywhere all the time. Meredith and Mitra, welcome and thank you for joining us. I know you're joining us from New York or the New York area and Hawaii. So thank you, Meredith.
Aloha, John. Great to see you.
Great to see you too, Mitra.
Thank you. Thank you for having us.
I'm going to start off with the "you're too young to remember" question. But CNN was originally the great disruptor of broadcast news. And by the time you were helping lead CNN Digital, did it feel like digital had become CNN's second act of disruption, almost a startup inside the mothership? Mitra?
I'm not too young to remember that. I feel like I have good genes. So thank you. Thank you. So I think of CNN as like my entry to journalism. Like you can't divorce CNN from the news. And so I guess for me, it would be that I don't remember maybe because, I was a child when CNN was created. That's true. But I also feel like that's important because I grew up against the backdrop of this being the news, right? And a new way of doing the news. And so in the same way that my kids will not remember life without a mobile phone, I would say my life is defined by having a concept of CNN as the news. First of all, it was a brand that like my whole family worldwide had heard of, right? So even though I was the managing editor at the LA Times, my family in India does not read the LA Times. Like that's not known to them. And so I think this idea of CNN being the news, being a brand that everyone knows globally, and, my own kind of background, which is a mix of global and local and digital and kind of looking around the corner to be a part of whatever the next thing is in journalism. Like that's kind of how I see the last 30 years I've spent in media. By the time I got to CNN, it actually didn't feel as much like a second act, as much as there's so much that digital can lean on CNN's roots, the essence of CNN and its mission, and this idea of always being on and being known and being in the conversation. And by the way, being in people's living rooms, which is what defines digital, right? This accessibility, this intimacy. And so for me, getting to a CNN and sort of being told, like you're going to help as a part of this digital transition. And Meredith can kind of tell you how she wooed a lot of talent in that time period and the language used. For me, getting to CNN, there was such, oh my gosh, do you guys know what you have that's so akin to the modern internet and the way people actually want to consume journalism?
And Meredith, obviously when the team launched, and let's give credit to Scott Wolfel, launched CNN.com back in the day, were you kind of the second wave revolutionary in your mind? Or what was your take on digital and CNN writ large?
I'd like your framework, John, about CNN digitally and everything we were doing digitally at the time being a second wave of disruption. I think that's true. I think it's true. I mean, I joined in 2009. So that's a really interesting time because to your point, there was a team of people before. I joined and CNN was already strong, getting a lot of audience digitally, especially CNN. And Scott and team built that up, and it's great, right? All of these jobs that we all have. So often, you get credit. You have to give credit to the people who came before you, who built a strong foundation. And then, if you're lucky, you get to keep on building on that. And that's what we got to do. So this idea that this moment where it's 2009, social media is ascendant, and at that moment, they're the good guys. They're fascinating, right? At that moment, we thought they shared our values because they said they did. And we thought their technology was just amazing. They're getting all these people on platforms like Facebook and Twitter and all of these interesting things are happening. And you want to be a part of that. And so we're talking about partnerships. We're talking about ways that we can extend CNN digitally beyond the walls that we had, the owned and operated properties, right? And so that was a big part of what we were doing early on, was just expanding. The other thing we were doing is we talked a lot. At the time, I called it a Pilates strategy. I don't know if anyone knew what I was talking about, but the idea, and I don't do Pilates, but the idea is like strengthen your core and stretch into new areas. So we were trying to double down on breaking news digitally and innovate there.
And then we were also trying to do new things in new areas and new beats. And, again, this is kind of a continuation, but, we were doing things around food and entertainment and religion and really just starting to dive into things beyond breaking news. And that was exciting. And as social was ascendant, playing in that arena too, so it was an amazing moment. We were separate early on. Early on in my time, 2009, 2000, we weren't integrated. And so that was another thing that I think aided the disruption, if you will, physically in Atlanta, back when Atlanta was very clearly the headquarters of CNN still. You remember this, we were in a separate part of the building behind the Starbucks on the ground floors. We weren't in the towers. And there was a whole ecosystem there because we were separated that allowed us to innovate a little bit faster, to do a bunch of things that were just a little different and not necessarily following directly in the path of what was happening on the linear air.
As you did engineer more of a coming together, and all legacy media organizations face this, there's a kind of maybe a little bit of a culture clash. And I'm curious for both of you, what do you think was the hardest part as you moved the two sides together, digital and let's call it the broadcast side? What were your biggest challenges and any lessons that emerged from that?
I mean, I think one is just the medium itself. There are aspects of breaking news that lent themselves really well to digital. And I really tried to kind of lean into this idea of like iterative journalism, for example, right? Like Wolf Blitzer will tell you what we know, but importantly, he also tells you what we don't know. For a lot of newspapers that were making the transition to digital, that was like a much newer phenomenon in journalism. So my approach, and because Meredith had a few years on me, I got there in 2016. I felt like I leaned into the what's working. Now, that being said, the type of video content creation that was happening on the internet, if you think about like the BuzzFeeds and the Now This, which was like very casual approaches to the viewer, right? Like you're talking to them, even with them, right? The way that an anchor at CNN talks, which like now is like the subject of so many memes and, but like that's a really hard thing to break. And so I think there was a part of me that was like, we just shouldn't try to break that. Like, we're not going to be BuzzFeed or Now This or, like CNN as a brand, like it's kind of that authority. And I think over the last few years, like since I've been gone, I've seen them kind of find almost this like third lane of the voice of like an Anderson Cooper talking about grief, right? Which Anderson Cooper, but there's clearly the subject matter lends itself to a certain tone that's working digitally. I feel like that was just like one kind of finding was that the talent for broadcast news as we knew it to digital, that felt like a bit of a transition. The other was just on, when I talk about this iterative journalism, like what Meredith is describing in terms of integrating, I feel like, and I'm really grateful you all are doing this because we had, 4,000 journalists to get the memo around to, right? It was not just the digital team because the nature of news gathering at CNN relies on the reason it's so good is because it's an army, right? The reason it's so hard is because it's an army. So for me, I don't know if Bill, this gets at your question, but as a manager, how do you quickly communicate change? Like that was like, I feel like my CNN years were like an MBA in change management because of that.
That's great.
That is good. Well, I think that that's interesting. Also, you're talking about how the change is coming at an incredible pace. And Meredith, you mentioned it was social media era was ascendant. That put its own pressures on sort of the metabolism, I guess, right? Even on the digital side. And I'm just curious, as you were trying to keep up with all that, you mentioned Now This and all this competition, I guess, that came along. What challenges did that present?
Yeah, I mean, there was so much happening. It was social media being ascendant. We're talking like, early mid, 2010s, right? There's a lot of activity, the BuzzFeeds of the world. Vice was an interesting early player. We were forming some partnerships with people all throughout our time there that were kind of, doing interesting things digitally, had interesting voices, had interesting approaches. And I think all of that was great for the most part. I think some of it was a distraction. And hindsight 2020, right, Bill? I mean, but I think some of it was a distraction. I think there were moments where some of us just got too, I don't know, enthralled by the shiny object, the latest company, the latest thing, the latest technology from whatever social platform, whatever Snapchat was doing, whatever it was. And we would spend a lot of time, we would spend a lot of money, a lot of money on investing in that. If I could rewind, I would have us focus more on innovating in the core, not outside. And I think that is why you see CNN, and they're doing the best they can these days, and they're making some great moves. But why in some ways they're working to play catch up with the New York Times a little bit. And hey, they've got two people, running CNN right now that led the Times to a lot of the success that the Times is having right now. But that investment in the core and in technology that is owned and operated and not somebody else's, and in really articulating what are you good at and how can you make it even better, as opposed to we're good at this, now let's go and do a bunch of other things. So breaking news, for example, and I think Mitra and I got there with the great team that we had during our time there, where we really started innovating digitally in breaking news. And it was a huge success and a smash hit with our audiences. Things like live blogging, which is kind of basic, but so good. I mean, oh my God. I mean, we got millions and millions and millions of people every single day because we were just using that kind of vibrancy, that dynamism, and bringing that to the web in a way that was different than here's an article and here's a video, right? And so we just kind of struggled, I think, with how much we're going to innovate in the core and what we're excellent at, breaking news, international news, for example, versus let's go try to do some of these other things. And I understand that tension. Some of these other things were extremely exciting. And if you don't experiment and try, then you're standing still. But I think there's things that are just remarkable that CNN did and is doing, and hopefully will do in the future, to have a global brand. I mean, global. There's nothing like CNN where people come to you when the most important things are happening. That's remarkable. I mean, that's what TED built, and that's what we got to build on, and that's what they're building on now. So I think the more that you invest in that and grow that, the better, because that's distinctive and it's something people need, and the audience is huge, and the stakes are high,
I agree with Meredith's kind of regret, but I also give us a little bit of grace because the reality in many markets was that Facebook was the internet. And unless CNN was willing to participate on Facebook, we just would not have access to certain markets.
Of course, our series is, the conceit is the two-sided coin of breaking news, right? Super important, revolutionary, but also has also created this kind of chaotic environment of notifications all the time that we live in. So here's the question. In the digital era, did breaking news also become a traffic crutch, something the organization leaned on because it reliably produced clicks, alerts, audience spikes, and urgency? You think it became a crutch?
I don't. I think we treated breaking news differently digitally by nature of the platform and by nature of us making our own decisions about what was going to be best for the digital audiences. I'm curious what Mitra is going to say, but I don't think it became a crutch. I think we largely did right by breaking news. For people who wanted that from us, we delivered it, and we delivered it in new ways along the course of our time there. I understand the criticism. I understand where it comes from. I certainly understand it on air. I mean, we were having those conversations all the time, about using the breaking news banner too much again and again and again. Digital, that's a different experience. Something can be breaking and developing, and we're going to leave the banner up, on our app and all of our sites and everywhere we are in social, and let people know there's something breaking and developing, and we're on it and we're here for you. So I think we handled that pretty well. There might have been a couple of things that we could have done better, but I don't know, Mitra?
Yeah, I think you're right. I mean, the areas I'm proudest of, and Meredith referenced, for example, like a live blog. So we started a product called Live Story. A really good example of digital driving innovation for the overall brand would be we would go live from, let's say, like there's a hostage situation in Philadelphia. TV is largely on the latest something in the Trump administration, right? Because I was like, my 5 years at CNN were squarely the Trump campaign and his presidency. And so this is what I remember. So we would be on, some development there. If suddenly on our live blog, we have like 30 or 40,000 concurrent users, meaning it's spiking, there's interest in this. I could very easily, and I did go to Jeff Zucker and say, Jeff, our story on Trump is getting, I don't know, 5,000 concurrents. Philadelphia has a hostage situation going on, right? And he would, to his credit, and he did this, he'd call the control room and say, let's go to Philadelphia. Digital is saying there's a lot of interest. And like that connection for me feels like a really important legacy, I think, for both Meredith and I, in how digital can lead the way on what the news agenda is, how sometimes it's okay for your audience to guide you on their interests,
Yes.
right? And we had an amazing kind of barometer by being the largest news site on the planet. Like we talk about data insights and all the ways we try to get to know our audience, which like we definitely lacked in some cases, but our audience in terms of telling us what they wanted to hear more of, like that was I felt like I was in a daily conversation with them. Right. And so I know, John, that there's like a feeling around breaking news, but we were also able to highlight certain stories that I think otherwise wouldn't have been considered breaking news, that are, local, situated in certain communities. I wish in hindsight we had done more of that and maybe done a little bit more like earlier, because one aspect I think people respond to breaking news as being like a live stream of a rally or a live stream of like a candidate stumping and sort of this definition of news, right? I think there has been a lot of reckoning with CNN's role in that. But the second thing I'm talking about, which is like audiences have interest in news besides politics. And we had a barometer on that. I think we tried to use it. I think we could have used it a little bit more.
I think an adjacent question, and then we'll move on to other things, but in the breaking news world and this is not limited to digital, but in high profile breaking news things, not rallies, as you say, Mitra, but, when the Boston Marathon bombing happened or the famous Balloon Boy incident, which everyone likes to talk about, everyone is scrambling, right? It's not just the newsroom, the digital newsroom, but now you're getting competition from the Vices and others of the world. And I'm just curious how you guys felt that may have changed or amped up pressure inside of CNN as you made coverage decisions about, take the Boston Marathon bombing, where stuff was coming fast and furious from the field.
We had a lot of conversations, and this is where the organization would always come together so brilliantly as a whole, right? Where those barriers would break down between, if somebody's on the digital team or news gathering or programming or national or international, and you would, it was, the horrible news aside, it was magical to see that teamwork unfold in moments of breaking news. And you could see it in Atlanta, where I was, or New York, where Mitra was. You would physically, like, people would just like huddle and get together and listen, and who's the lead, who are they on the phone with, what are we taking, what are we doing? It was how like trusted journalism in moments where something has just happened should work. And did we get some things wrong? Of course, every news organization out there has, and that's humans dealing with uncertainty. I think we did a pretty good job in an organization of almost 4,000 people, trying to remind ourselves, and there's a lot of type A personalities, Lord knows, at CNN, that we need to slow down in these moments. It's better to be right than it is to be first.
Did CNN during your era, because they're in a different era now, I think it's fair to say, ever fully come to terms with the fact that it was no longer just competing with NBC, CBS, ABC, MSNBC, and Fox, and the New York Times, but with platforms, creators, witnesses, algorithms, and the audience itself? Or when did it come to terms with that? When did it start to recognize this landscape is shifting and the institutional news provider that we are is not going to last fully much longer?
Yeah, I think that there is something inherently in CNN that is different from creators. So like I work with creators a lot now in my company, right? I see them as partners. We take some cues from them. We will assign them to stories. I could not see CNN doing that, because the one thing that surprised me most when I got to CNN is what it takes for CNN to confirm something is indeed news, right? Meaning that process of, did this actually happen, is not hearsay. It's not the Associated Press's reporting. It's not, there's a viral video, let's aggregate that, as many digital players did in our time. It was literally, let us confirm this news. do we know this to be true? How do we know this to be true? And it's like so Captain Basic in journalism, but that was if you ask me what was the biggest surprise of your time at CNN, it's actually that, right? That I didn't know when CNN confirms the news story, it like really confirms a news story. So there's a part of your question that I think the brand set itself up a little bit differently from almost like the participation on the internet that you're describing. And I think, Meredith had set up a social video team that was vetting information. The number of times that team would find everyone is reporting something, but actually the real story is either a little more nuanced, flat out not true. The person who they're writing about was never contacted is a pretty high number. So I think there's a place for a CNN in that type of world of like a lot of misinformation and of a lot of what you're saying, John, in terms of like even the question of who gets to be a journalist, right? And I'm not dictating what CNN should do. It's not the model I practice today, right? It's, again, much more participatory, much more community driven. But there's something about that model that I respect we hung on for as long as we did.
I think there's this opportunity, this huge opportunity for CNN as slop continues to slurp around the internet, and as people don't know the provenance of something, and as polarization and isolation continues, fueled in such a large part by existing social media platforms today, that these trusted brands matter more than they ever have. More than they ever have. And so it's not about, do you guys get the creator economy and how cool are you? It's how accurate are you and how much do I trust you? And there's a lot of people who still feel that way about CNN. And it's even that trust is higher on the local level for a lot of the organizations that we know and the ones that we work in now.
Just to pick up on something you were saying, and it's interesting, Meredith, you sort of led us here as well. And this is not really CNN specific. I was at NBC News Digital in the same period that you were there, and all legacy media was faced with this tension between how much to invest in digital when you considered how much the TV side and the cable side, in the case of CNN, was still generating the revenue and all the heat and light. And I guess looking back, and again, this is not to say look back in anger, but do you think CNN invested enough during the Jeff Zucker years, for example, in digital innovation and audience development and other things that could have helped build for the future you're now speaking of? Is there any?
We invested a lot in digital. I mean, different flavors of digital, but it's, it's like why, I got to stalk someone like Mitra and lure her to CNN. And then Mitra was a key part of like hiring and growing and just building this incredible team that we had at a critical time, like not just at CNN, but like in the news cycle of the nation and the world. And so there was a lot of investment. I think you could challenged was the investment made in the right places, right? Per our earlier conversation, should we have done more in the core and more on technical innovation that supports the spread of accurate, trusted journalism and creative formats and new, wonderful ways, as opposed to, spending a lot of money doing things on the side? I think you can say that now in hindsight. Maybe we could have done a little bit more on that. Yeah, there was a lot of investment and there was a lot of action. I mean, in our time, here's a small thing that Jeff did. Mitra will remember this because she had to do it sometimes. Jeff Zucker changed the structure of the news meetings when he came on. I mean, one, he jumped in and was running them, right? There was a 9:00 network-wide news meeting in person, over Zoom, on the phone, and everyone got together and talked about the agenda for the day. And during my time there, I went from digital being in the room to hear what everybody on TV was planning to Jeff saying, I need digital to go first and talk about the audience. I need to know, and I need you to give context. So we would say right at the top of the meeting, the very first thing, this is how much audience we got yesterday. We got 22 million unique users yesterday across our digital platforms. The top 3 things that they were interested in were X, Y, and Z. And that would start it off. And so it's a small thing, but it's a significant act to say to an organization that is a cable broadcast legacy organization that the definitive planning meeting for the day's news is going to start with audience focus because that's what digital is so good at. And, so things like that, really help push us forward.
I want to shift to a question that moves away from the business model to sort of the shift in culture on the mobile social era where voice more and more started to matter and audiences expected more transparency and maybe identity and accountability and lived experience. Question for the two of you is simply, did CNN's kind of traditional neutral voice become a strength or maybe a hindrance or constraint, or was it a little bit of both in that emerging environment? I guess, Mitra, that's really more
Yeah, no, it's a good
you.
question. I mean, I ran the opinion section. Ironically, a guy who hired me as an intern at Newsday ended up reporting to me. So that's sort of also like you never know who's going to end up at CNN. And he ran the opinion section. I do feel like digitally, we really tried to make place for opinionating on the internet and this idea of like kind of a take, which was so much of how people's daily journalism was built. We, clearly labeled that, clearly like people had a point of view. Many of our CNN contributors were a part of that report. So if you think about like a Van Jones or David Axelrod, who are these large personalities, right? They're linked to CNN. So I saw that as an asset in terms of having access to the voices that were, defining us on TV and being able to use them digitally. The neutral voice, the harder part in kind of what I was describing around breaking news is that there is a way a news story has historically been structured. Right. And so a lot of what we were seeing successful, especially in the social space, was a take, an outrageous headline, something that would make you feel a certain way. And CNN kind of stayed away from that, even as like my jam was headlines that would try to inspire a little bit of outrage, right? Like that was what I was known for. So I would try to push us, but it was always like right up against, it wasn't quite what a BuzzFeed or even a Washington Post would do. Now, CNN did not rely on social traffic as heavily as those two organizations did. And so my guess, I have not looked at CNN, like I haven't asked anyone at CNN about their numbers, but as social started to devalue journalism, CNN did not experience the traffic drop off that those organizations did. So I think the price you paid for a take, right, or a opinionated or not being neutral was that you had to rely on certain platforms and the types of content that were favored. The other thing, and this is again in hindsight, I sometimes think CNN wasn't shared because I think of the news as CNN delivers it as more of a public utility. And so, whereas like the New Yorker, the Washington Post, like if you share stories from that, it's an assertion of like your intellect and how smart you are. And a lot of those headlines are an assertion of your point of view. In hindsight, I think CNN played this middle of the road. We are trying to give people the bread and butter of news. There's not embellishment. So, Bill, to your question of tone and like, we're just going to tell you what happened, right? I didn't love it all the time, but again, in hindsight, I think that was the place and that was who was coming to us. And there's something to be said for just give people the facts like straight up.
I mean, Mitra, you have to edit yourself. You were not doing outrage headline writing. You were going, it was great. I mean, there would be moments where Mitra would say, I'm not having a great day. So to make myself feel better, I went and I edited some headlines on the homepage. And I love that because it's also a sign that a lot of us do this, right? You have something that, might be something that feels hard to control, but then there's this one thing that you can do and that's going to make an impact. And you were and are, I'm sure, still an excellent capturer of the essence of a story that's going to create interest. And we were constantly talking about, I mean, I remember Jeff using words like, we're being too genteel. Like, let's use language that is vivid and that's interesting. And I don't think we were ever driving towards outrage or clickbait. I mean, we definitely had some conversations around that, right? There were moments where we thought we might be getting close and let's reel it in. But we were trying to do something that was compelling and interesting and not overly robotic or removed. And that is the daily art of journalism these days. How do you do that? And you're not doing it for clicks but you're doing it for interest and you're doing it because these are really important stories and they matter. So let's get people engaged and keeping, trust steady and growing if you can all throughout. So we have those conversations a lot.
So, of course, the AI question. If you were both in the same positions you were in then, what would be your perspective on AI? Would it be keeping you up at night or opportunity for CNN?
I am so glad I'm not at CNN in this AI era. I mean, that's my answer to you, John, which is that I have been able to leverage AI as a journalist and as someone running a newsroom in ways that I never could at CNN. And that is probably a freeing gift and a freeing answer to your question, because I don't know how you codify a policy around this for thousands of people. I think it's kind of a losing proposition. Like, there are ethical dilemmas, there's moral dilemmas. I think from a reskilling perspective, like just even getting people to understand prompts and vibe coding, and like, it's just a whole new vocabulary. And so we kind of had it easy in some ways. Like, we were trying to get participation, integration. You're doing this work anyway. Let's just kind of move it over to here, or let us know what you're working. Like, what you're asking, John, I mean, there's a part of me that feels like the AI economy, the best answer is to work in like, if you're running a local newsroom of like 5 or fewer people, because that's the best way to leverage the technology that's afforded to us now, right? And that's one answer, which is what I'm doing in my local news site. There's another, which is it the job of organizations like CNN to meet this moment, having already been burned by the platforms as we have been? I think this is a bit of what the New York Times is doing in terms of looking at AI through the lens of copyright, just as an example. I think for a CNN, could they be leading in this space to say, no, not again? We, have developed the following when it comes to copyright. Because unfortunately, with the AI platforms right now, your success of the internet that no longer exists is still highly relevant, meaning CNN was number one for the decade previous. So CNN, as and I'm sure you guys have seen this, when you are searching the AI chat, will often turn up CNN just because it's a favored result, right? CNN probably has the power to combat some of that, but I think that from the $1 trillion plus valuations of some of these companies, even a CNN isn't big enough to combat what we're up against. So I feel like I gave you a wishy-washy but very honest answer.
That's a good one. I guess let me ask a question for both of you as a really big picture, which is about the future of CNN. Here we are in a moment when new ownership is pending, as it were. Meredith, you've made some references to protect the core. I'm curious, if you had the opportunity what would you tell the next owners of CNN, the whole enterprise, to protect at all costs and to double down on, and what is most important going forward in your view?
Build, grow, and innovate your own tech. Double down on breaking news. Doesn't mean do more of it necessarily, right? Doesn't mean put the banner up on the screen more, but innovate around breaking news. No brand has the permission that CNN has, and the need that people want to find out what is actually going on when big stuff is happening, and really invest in international. It's a global news organization, and trusted stories from all over the world, and not just the news gathering piece, but the storytelling piece. That's it. Tech and breaking news and global. That's my answer, Bill.
Good one.
Thank you.
Mitra, any advice?
I would say plus one to everything Meredith just said. I would just add one, which is an area that I could certainly use a lot of help, is just being live in more places and going big on the midterms. So the challenges of local news, even as you're seeing a lot of innovation, you're seeing a lot of creators, like when it comes to even in New York media, we are the most covered market in America, saying, are you covering these 3 congressional races outside of Manhattan? The answer is usually no. Right. And so I think that CNN, and this is where I developed, like, I do a ton of community forums, debates. You could ask me to like moderate like dog catcher, and I'd be like, yeah, we'll be there. Like, it's just and I learned this at CNN, this idea of kind of not just creating moments, but also there's an excellence you can count on with the way that this debate and discussion will be moderated, which you guys remember, like the hours and hours of practice and, role playing and all of that goes into staging events and debates. I'm not saying you have to apply that locally, but this idea of like being in a lot of places, I feel like they could bring to, and it's not a lot for them because they already have the infrastructure to go live across the country. And I would love if we saw more of that, especially for these upcoming midterms.
And real quickly, last question, where do you think, Meredith, journalism goes from here?
A small question.
I think it goes, I'll do my best. I think it goes into more trust. I see optimism out there. It's fueled a little bit by some negativity, but it's the rise of, we don't know where things are coming from. We don't know if it's human or not. We don't know who or what to trust. People feel disconnected. They feel like they've been engineered to just doom scroll all day. I need to know what's actually going on, and I need an organization that will help me figure that out. We're trying to do that on the local level at Hawaii Public Radio, and it seems to be working really well. I wish that for CNN on the global scale with that brand that's so important. I also think I've got a lot of optimism around local news, and I'm biased, but I'm seeing things that I have not seen before, including just on the business model. Really briefly, at CNN, we were challenged on this idea of, everyone saw what was happening. The revenue from the major distributors was declining. Ad sales was declining, but meanwhile, digital is rising in every single metric, but it just hadn't caught up all the way, right? And that's the trend in a lot of these large legacy companies. That's interesting, and so they were trying to, and they did sometime in the last year, launch a direct to consumer, subscription model. But the irony is here, this little public media station in Hawaii, the direct to consumer model is working. And we give the product away for free, by the way. There's no paywall. People just give what they want and what they can. And it's 100%, now that the federal funding has been pulled, it's 100% community backed. And the revenue is stronger than it's ever been. So that gives me hope and like a real clear metric that people are saying they need something that they can trust on a local level.
It's great.
Excellent. A great way to land. Meredith and Mitra, thank you for your time today, your candor, your perspective, and helping us understand this pivotal chapter in CNN's story. And thanks to all of you for watching Breaking the News Deep Cut Conversations. If this conversation resonated with you, please share it with anyone who cares about journalism, technology, public trust, and the future of news. We're also inviting you to help us bring the full documentary podcast series, Breaking the News, CNN and the Birth of Chaos Media, to life. This is an independent project built on deep reporting, archival research, and conversations like this one. We're examining how the modern news ecosystem was built, where it fractured, and what's at stake now for journalism and democracy. You'll find a link below to learn more about the project and support it. Every contribution helps us bring the story to life. Thanks for being part of our community. We'll see you all next time.